Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of the diplomatic station, watching the last human evacuation ships disappear into hyperspace. His father's voice echoed in his memory from their final conversation 3 days ago. "Son, sometimes the greatest victory comes from knowing when to retreat. Remember that." Ambassador David Chen had been humanity's voice on the Galactic Council for 15 years. He had fought tirelessly for human rights, trade agreements, and territorial recognition. But the Council had made their decision. Humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent. The vote was unanimous among the 12 founding species. Humans would be expelled from civilized space within 1 standard galactic year. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold metal wall. At 28, he had spent his entire adult life in diplomatic service, following in his father's footsteps. He understood 17 alien languages, had negotiated mining rights with the crystalline Zephyrians, and had even managed to broker peace between the warlike Kragnoth and the peaceful Vallani. But none of that mattered now. The Galactic Council chambers stretched out below him, a massive amphitheater where representatives from across the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of worlds. The architecture was deliberately intimidating, with towering pillars that reached toward a domed ceiling painted with the constellations of the founding worlds. Each species had their designated section, raised platforms that allowed them to look down on whoever stood in the center-speaking circle. Today, those platforms held the victorious, the tall, ethereal Etherons with their translucent skin glowing softly, the insectoid hive collective, their chittering voices speaking in perfect unison, the mechanical synthetics, their optical sensors tracking every movement with cold precision, the aquatic deeplings in their mobility suits, water sloshing gently as they gestured. All of them united in their decision to cast humanity into the void. Marcus had watched from the human observation gallery as his father made humanity's final plea. David Chen had stood in that speaking circle with the dignity of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle but refused to surrender without honor. His words had been eloquent, passionate, and ultimately futile. "The human species has contributed significantly to galactic civilization," his father had argued. "Our medical advances have saved billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Our agricultural techniques have ended famines on 17 planets. Our artists and musicians have enriched cultures throughout the spiral arm. We ask not for special treatment, but for the same consideration given to any member species that has made mistakes while learning to find their place in the galactic community." The response had been swift and merciless. Speaker Vorthak of the Kragnoth had been the first to address the assembly. Despite being one of the most militaristic species in the galaxy, even they found humanity too violent to tolerate. "The humans speak of contributions," Vorthak had growled, his tusks gleaming in the chamber's light. "But we have seen their history. We have studied their wars. Never have we encountered a species so capable of turning on their own kind. In 3,000 years of their recorded history, they have known perhaps 50 years of complete peace. They wage war with a creativity and enthusiasm that disturbs even us." The Ethron representative had floated forward next, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We do not question their achievements in medicine and agriculture, but their psychological profiles are deeply troubling. They form emotional attachments to ideas, territories, and concepts in ways that lead to irrational violence. They will die for abstractions. They will kill for symbols. This is not the rational behavior of a species ready for galactic citizenship." One by one, each species had presented their case. The Vallani spoke of human literature, noting the disturbing prevalence of conflict, suffering, and death as central themes in their storytelling. The Deeplings presented studies showing that humans were statistically more likely to resort to violence when faced with diplomatic stalemates than any other known sapient species. The synthetics displayed cold calculations showing that integrating humans into galactic society posed an unacceptable risk to overall stability. The final blow had come from an unexpected source. The Zephyrians, crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance, had always been among humanity's strongest supporters on the Council. Their representative, a towering formation of living crystal that caught and refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, had spoken with what seemed like genuine sadness. "We have worked closely with humans for many cycles," the Zephyrian had resonated. "We have seen their capacity for both creation and destruction. We have studied their neural patterns, their chemical responses, their decision-making processes, and we have concluded that they are fundamentally incompatible with peaceful coexistence. They do not simply choose violence sometimes. They are hardwired for it. Their brains release pleasure chemicals during conflict. Their stories celebrate warriors above peacemakers. Their children play games of war before they can properly speak. With heavy hearts, we must agree that they pose an existential threat to galactic peace." David Chen had been given one final opportunity to respond. Marcus remembered the way his father's shoulders had straightened, the way his voice had carried clearly through the vast chamber despite speaking without artificial amplification. "You judge us for our capacity for violence, but you ignore the context of that violence. Yes, we fight. Yes, we have wars. But we also have the greatest capacity for sacrifice of any species you have encountered. We die for strangers. We risk everything to save those we have never met. We fight not because we love violence, but because we love what violence can protect. You see our wars and call us monsters. I see our wars and see a species that refuses to let evil triumph, even at the cost of our own lives." The vote had been taken immediately afterward, 12-0. Even the human delegation had been forced to abstain rather than vote against themselves. The resolution was clear. Humanity had one galactic standard year to withdraw all colonies, ships, and citizens from recognized galactic territory. Any human found in civilized space after the deadline would be considered a hostile presence and dealt with accordingly. Now Marcus stood alone in the observation deck as the last evacuation ships vanished into the darkness. His father had departed on the final diplomatic vessel, still believing that somehow, somewhere, there might be a chance for negotiation, for reconsideration. Marcus had volunteered to stay behind to handle the final administrative details of humanity's withdrawal. At least, that's what he had told his father. The truth was more complex. Marcus had spent the last 3 days since the vote studying everything he could access about the Galactic Council's structure, their decision-making processes, their security protocols, and their individual member species' weaknesses. He had used his diplomatic credentials to access databases, communication networks, and historical records that would soon be closed to him forever. What he had discovered had changed everything. The Galactic Council's decision hadn't been based on objective analysis of human behavior. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign by 3 specific species to eliminate what they saw as a threat to their own power. The Ethrons, Synthetics, and Hive Collective had been meeting in secret for the past 2 years, planning humanity's expulsion. The other species had been manipulated, their fears carefully cultivated, and their concerns amplified through subtle propaganda campaigns. The evidence was all there, buried in communication logs, resource allocation records, and psychological manipulation studies. The Ethrons had used their natural telepathic abilities to influence the emotional responses of the more susceptible species during council sessions. The Synthetics had run complex social modeling programs to determine exactly which human behaviors to highlight and which achievements to downplay in order to create the desired negative impression. The Hive Collective had coordinated the timing and presentation of evidence to maximize psychological impact. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Marcus had found in the sealed military planning archives that he had accessed using his father's emergency diplomatic codes. The three conspirator species weren't content with simply expelling humanity from civilized space. They had already begun planning humanity's complete extermination. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Phase 1 had been the expulsion vote, which would force humans to retreat to their original territory in what the galaxy considered the barbaric Outer Rim. Phase 2 would involve economic sanctions and trade embargoes that would slowly strangle human colonies, making them desperate and aggressive. Phase 3 would be the deployment of peacekeeping forces to protect galactic commerce from human piracy. Piracy that would be deliberately provoked through the economic warfare of Phase 2. Phase 4 would be the regrettable but necessary elimination of humanity as a threat to galactic security. The timeline showed Phase 2 beginning in 6 months. Phase 3 was scheduled for 2 years from now. Phase 4 was projected to be complete within 5 years of the initial expulsion vote. Marcus turned away from the observation deck and walked through the empty corridors of the diplomatic station. His footsteps echoed in spaces that had once bustled with human activity. The quarters where junior diplomats had worked on trade negotiations, the conference rooms where cultural exchange programs had been planned, the recreational areas where human and alien children had played together, proving that peaceful coexistence was possible. All of it would be dismantled within the week. The Galactic Council had been very clear about that. No trace of human presence was to remain in civilized space. He stopped at his father's office and palmed the entry sensor. The door slid open to reveal a room that David Chen had occupied for over a decade. Awards and commendations from various species lined the walls. Photos of successful negotiations and treaty signings covered the desk. A small Earth flag stood in one corner next to a collection of gifts from grateful alien civilizations. Marcus sat in his father's chair and activated the secure communication system. He had messages to send, arrangements to make, and preparations to complete. But first, he opened a recording channel and began to speak. Personal log, Marcus Chen, Assistant Deputy Ambassador to the Galactic Council. Today marks the end of humanity's participation in galactic civilization, but it also marks the beginning of something else. My father taught me that diplomacy is about finding common ground, building understanding, and creating mutual benefit for all parties. But he also taught me something else. Something he learned from his grandfather who fought in Earth's last great war. He taught me that sometimes when diplomacy fails, when justice is denied, when evil is allowed to triumph, then good people must be prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect the innocent. He paused, thinking of his father's disappointed face when he discovered what his son was planning. David Chen had built his career on the belief that any problem could be solved through patient dialogue and careful negotiation. He would never approve of what Marcus was about to do. The Galactic Council believes they have seen the worst of humanity, Marcus continued. They think our capacity for violence makes us unsuitable for their peaceful civilization. They're about to discover how wrong they are. They haven't seen our capacity for violence. They've seen our restraint. They've seen us holding back, trying to fit in, trying to be good galactic citizens. They've never seen what humans can really do when we stop trying to play by other people's rules. He ended the recording and began composing his first message. It would go to Admiral Sarah Martinez, commanding officer of the human fleet that was supposedly retreating to Earth's outer territories. Martinez was old-school military, trained in the days when humanity had to fight for every inch of space they claimed. She would understand what needed to be done. The second message would go to Dr. Elizabeth Reeves at the Titan Research Facility. Reeves had been working on classified projects that the Galactic Council had forbidden human scientists to pursue. Projects involving quantum manipulation, synthetic biology, and theoretical weapons that violated several galactic treaties. Projects that humanity had abandoned in the name of peaceful coexistence. The third message would go to Commander Jason Torres, leader of the Outer Rim Mining Consortium. Torres controlled vast resources and had connections throughout the frontier territories that existed beyond galactic jurisdiction. More importantly, Torres had never forgotten the harsh lessons learned during humanity's expansion period, when they had faced hostile environments and aggressive species without the protection of galactic law. As Marcus composed each message, he felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. For the first time in 3 days, he knew exactly what he was doing and why. The Galactic Council had made their choice. They had decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist alongside civilized species. They had voted to cast humans out into the darkness, believing that isolation would eventually lead to extinction. They were about to learn that isolation could also lead to evolution. And evolution, in the case of humanity, didn't always mean becoming more peaceful. 6 months had passed since humanity's expulsion from the Galactic Council, and the consequences were beginning to show exactly as the secret coalition had planned. Trade routes that had sustained human colonies for decades were suddenly closed to human ships. Resource agreements were terminated without warning. Scientific collaborations that had lasted generations were abruptly ended. On the crystalline world of Nexus Prime, Speaker Vorthak of the Kragnoth received his daily intelligence briefing with satisfaction. The holographic display showed human colony ships scattered across the Outer Rim territories, struggling to establish new supply lines and trade relationships. Several colonies had already sent desperate messages requesting permission to return to galactic space, willing to accept any terms for readmission. "The humans are weakening faster than our projections suggested," reported Intelligence Commander Thrak, his scarred hide bearing the marks of countless battles. "Their colony on Kepler 442b has lost 40% of its population to disease outbreaks. Their mining operations in the Vega system have been forced to shut down due to equipment failures they cannot repair without access to galactic technology markets." Vorthak's tusks gleamed as he smiled. The Kragnoth might be warriors, but they understood the art of warfare that required no weapons. Economic strangulation was far more efficient than direct military action, and it had the advantage of maintaining the appearance of civilized behavior. "What of their military capabilities?" Vorthak asked, though he expected the answer to bring equally good news. "Scattered and defensive," Thrak replied. "Most of their fleet is engaged in evacuation support and colony protection duties. They show no signs of organizing offensive capabilities. Admiral Martinez has positioned their remaining warships in defensive formations around their core systems, exactly as we predicted they would." The intelligence briefing continued with reports from across human space. Food shortages on agricultural worlds that had relied on galactic fertilizer imports. Medical crises on planets that could no longer access advanced alien pharmaceutical technologies. Infrastructure failures on stations that required specialized components from non-human manufacturers. What the intelligence reports did not mention, because no outside observer could see it, was what was happening in the hidden facilities scattered throughout human space. Deep beneath the surface of Jupiter's moon, Europa, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves stood in a laboratory that officially did not exist, watching as her team made breakthrough after breakthrough in technologies that the Galactic Council had forbidden humanity to develop. "The quantum field generators are exceeding all specifications," reported Dr. Kim Park, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the facility's climate control. "We're achieving matter manipulation at the subatomic level with 97% accuracy. The weapons applications alone." "Don't think of them as weapons," Reeves interrupted, her eyes never leaving the data flowing across her screens. "Think of them as solutions to problems we haven't encountered yet. How are the biological enhancement protocols progressing?" Dr. James Sullivan looked up from his workstation where genetic sequences scrolled past at inhuman speeds. "The viral delivery systems are ready for testing. We can enhance human muscle density, reaction time, and cognitive processing speed by factors of 3 to 5. The modifications are stable and heritable. We could have an entire generation of enhanced humans within 20 years. And the Synthetic Organism Project? Dr. Anna Kowalski smiled grimly from her position at the biotechnology station. We've created 17 different strains of organisms capable of surviving in any known galactic environment. They can consume virtually any organic or inorganic matter for energy, reproduce at exponential rates, and be programmed with specific target parameters. If we needed to clear a planet of all life forms while leaving the infrastructure intact, we could do it in under a month. Reeves nodded slowly. Each project represented decades of research that humanity had abandoned when they joined the galactic community. The other species had convinced them that such technologies were unnecessary, that the Galactic Council's protection made advanced weapons development not just undesirable, but immoral. Humanity had dismantled their most promising research programs in the name of peaceful coexistence, but Marcus Chen's messages had changed everything. The evidence he had provided about the planned extermination campaign had reached every major research facility, military installation, and colony administration in human space. The response had been swift and unanimous. If the galaxy wanted to treat humanity as a threat, then humanity would become exactly that. Meanwhile, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, Commander Jason Torres oversaw the largest industrial mobilization in human history. Automated mining platforms stripped rare elements from asteroids at unprecedented rates. Massive manufacturing stations assembled components for ship designs that no human had built for over a century. Construction crews worked around-the-clock building facilities that would have been impossible to hide within galactic territory. Production rates are ahead of schedule on all fronts, reported Chief Engineer Maria Santos, her voice carrying clearly through Torres's command center. The new shipyards will be operational within 3 months. We'll be able to produce a fully armed destroyer every 2 weeks once we're at full capacity. Torres studied the production manifests flowing across his screens. Thousands of ships taking shape in hidden facilities. Not the exploration and colony vessels that humanity had built during their time in the galactic community, but pure warships designed for one purpose: destruction. The designs combined human engineering creativity with lessons learned from studying the weaknesses of every galactic species. "What about the special projects?" Torres asked. Santos's expression grew more serious. "The planet killer prototypes are testing successfully. We can crack a world's crust with a single ship-mounted device. The Starkiller concept is more complex, but Dr. Chen's team believes they can destabilize a solar system's primary star using quantum field manipulation. It would take several hours of sustained bombardment, but the effect would be irreversible." Torres nodded grimly. He had fought in the border wars during humanity's early expansion period. Before the Galactic Council had offered them membership in exchange for abandoning their more aggressive technologies. He remembered what humans could accomplish when they stopped trying to be civilized. The galaxy was about to get the same lesson. On Earth itself, Admiral Sarah Martinez stood in the Strategic Command Center buried deep beneath the North American continent. The walls around her displayed tactical information from across human space, tracking every ship movement, every resource allocation, every preparation for what was to come. Her staff worked with the focused intensity of people who knew they were preparing for a war that would determine the survival of their entire species. Intelligence reports from Marcus Chen continue to confirm the timeline, reported Colonel David Kim, her chief of staff. Phase 2 economic sanctions are proceeding exactly as the leaked documents predicted. Phase 3 military provocations are scheduled to begin in 18 months. We have approximately 2 years before they attempt to implement Phase 4. Martinez studied the galactic map projection that dominated the center of the room. Red markers showed the positions of galactic fleet elements. Blue markers showed human forces, currently scattered and apparently weak. Yellow markers showed the hidden facilities where humanity's true strength was being prepared. 2 years to prepare for a war against 12 species with combined populations in the trillions, industrial capacity spanning hundreds of star systems, and military forces that have maintained galactic peace for over 1,000 years, Martinez said quietly. Any reasonable analysis would conclude that we're facing impossible odds. Yes, ma'am, Colonel Kim agreed. Fortunately, humans have never been particularly reasonable. Martinez smiled for the first time in months. She had read the historical files, studied the accounts of humanity's most desperate battles. Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off an army of hundreds of thousands. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where civilians with improvised weapons fought the most powerful military machine in their world's history. The defense of Stalingrad, where soldiers fought for every building, every room, every inch of ground. Humanity's history was filled with examples of impossible victories achieved through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "What's our current strategic position?" she asked. "Better than it appears," Kim replied, activating detailed displays. "Our apparent retreat has actually allowed us to consolidate resources and personnel in ways that would have been impossible while under galactic observation. We've evacuated our most valuable scientists, engineers, and military personnel from exposed colonies and relocated them to secure facilities. Our manufacturing capacity is actually higher now than it was during galactic membership, since we're no longer restricted by galactic technology limitation treaties. And our intelligence network. Marcus Chen has exceeded all expectations. His diplomatic credentials gave him access to classified council archives before his cover was compromised. We now have detailed information about the military capabilities, strategic weaknesses, and internal political tensions of every council species. More importantly, we have the complete battle plans for their planned extermination campaign." Martinez turned to study the tactical projections showing potential battle scenarios. The galactic forces had enormous advantages in numbers, technology, and resources, but they also had critical weaknesses. They had become comfortable, accustomed to dealing with threats through political negotiation rather than military force. Their fleets were designed for peacekeeping operations against pirates and dissidents, not for total war against a determined enemy. Most significantly, they had never faced an opponent with humanity's particular combination of creativity, adaptability, and sheer vicious determination when survival was at stake. "Initiate Operation Prometheus," Martinez ordered. "All facilities are to accelerate production schedules. All research projects are to prioritize combat applications. All military units are to begin intensive training for deep space combat operations. And send a message to Marcus Chen. Tell him it's time for Phase 1 of his plan." Back on the diplomatic station, Marcus Chen received Admiral Martinez's message with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. For 6 months, he had maintained his cover as a minor diplomatic functionary handling routine administrative matters related to humanity's withdrawal. The council species had largely ignored him, considering him too junior to pose any threat. This oversight had allowed him to continue accessing information and monitoring their communications far longer than should have been possible. But his usefulness as a spy was coming to an end. The Council was beginning to implement more serious security measures as they prepared for the next phase of their campaign against humanity. Soon, his access would be completely cut off, which meant it was time to transition from intelligence gathering to direct action. Marcus activated his secure communications system and began composing a series of messages that would change everything. The first went to resistance cells he had been secretly organizing among non-council species throughout the galaxy. Dozens of minor civilizations that resented council dominance and had been looking for an opportunity to challenge the established order. They would provide crucial intelligence and logistical support for what was to come. The second message went to criminal organizations operating in the gray zones between galactic territories. Smugglers, mercenaries, and pirates who had no love for council authority and could be hired to create chaos and confusion when the time came. The third message was the most important. It went to his father, Ambassador David Chen, who was currently on Earth attempting to negotiate some form of peaceful resolution to the crisis. The message was brief and would break his father's heart. "Dad, diplomacy has failed. War is inevitable. Forgive me for what I'm about to do." The final message went to a dead-drop communication system that would relay it to Admiral Martinez, Dr. Reeves, Commander Torres, and every other leader in the human resistance network. It contained just 4 words: "Let slip the dogs." Within hours, the message had propagated throughout human space. In hidden facilities across dozens of star systems, scientists began loading experimental weapons onto prototype warships. Military commanders activated sleeper agents who had been positioned throughout galactic space during the evacuation period. Industrial centers shifted from secret research and development to full-scale war production. The galaxy had voted to expel humanity because they believed humans were too violent for civilized society. They were about to discover that they had been wrong about one crucial detail. Humans weren't too violent for civilized society. They were too civilized for their own society. And when civilization failed, when diplomacy was revealed as a facade, when the choice came down to submission or extinction, humans would always choose a third option. They would choose war. And when humans chose war, they didn't fight to win. They fought to ensure that their enemies would never threaten anyone ever again. The first sign that something had changed came during what should have been a routine council session. Speaker Vorthak was presenting the quarterly report on humanity's declining situation when alarms began sounding throughout the diplomatic station. Emergency lights bathed the great chamber in red, and automated systems began announcing security breaches across multiple sectors. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" demanded High Coordinator Zeth Ka of the Synthetics, their optical sensors blazing with increased intensity. "Our security protocols are absolute. Nothing should be able to penetrate this station's defenses." The answer came from Marcus Chen, who stepped into the speaking circle without authorization. He should have been processed through multiple security checkpoints, verified by biometric scanners, and approved by at least 3 different council representatives before being allowed on the chamber floor. Instead, he had somehow appeared as if materializing from thin air. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without amplification. "But I thought the Council should know that humanity has decided to decline your generous offer of extinction." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from a dozen species began speaking at once, demanding explanations, calling for security, and questioning how a human had bypassed their defenses. Through it all, Marcus stood calmly in the center, waiting for them to realize that their security systems were no longer responding to their commands. High Coordinator Zeth Ka was the first to understand the implications. Their synthetic consciousness processed the available data in microseconds and reached the obvious conclusion. "You have compromised our systems. How is this possible? Our technology is centuries ahead of human capabilities." Marcus smiled, and for the first time, the assembled representatives saw something in his expression that made them genuinely uncomfortable. It wasn't anger or desperation or even hatred. It was the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards and was enjoying the moment before revealing them. "Your technology is centuries ahead of what we were allowed to develop while we were members of this council," Marcus corrected. "But humanity has been busy during our 6-month exile. We've had time to remember who we really are when we're not trying to play by other people's rules." As if summoned by his words, holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing scenes from across the galaxy that should have been impossible for any human to access. Real-time images from the most secure military installations of every Council species. Live feeds from their command centers, research facilities, and strategic planning meetings. The Ethron representative, her translucent form flickering with distress, attempted to establish telepathic contact with her homeworld's defense coordinators. The connection failed completely. Our quantum communication networks are being blocked. How are you accomplishing this? We designed our systems to be immune to any known form of interference. You designed your systems to be immune to interference from known galactic technologies, Marcus agreed. Unfortunately for you, humans have a talent for developing unknown technologies very quickly when properly motivated. On the main display, Admiral Sarah Martinez appeared, broadcasting from the bridge of a warship that no Council database could identify. The vessel's design combined human engineering principles with technologies that several species recognized as theoretically possible but practically unachievable. "Greetings, Galactic Council," Martinez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded forces capable of backing up her words. "I am Admiral Martinez, Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Fleet. I'm broadcasting to inform you that humanity has received your declaration of war and accepts your challenge." "Declaration of war?" Speaker Vorthak snarled, his tusks gleaming dangerously. "We made no such declaration. We voted for your expulsion from galactic territory, nothing more." Marcus activated another holographic display, this one showing classified Council documents that detailed the four-phase extermination plan. Phase 1, expulsion. Phase 2, economic warfare. Phase 3, military provocation. Phase 4, complete elimination of human presence in the galaxy. Should I continue reading? Or would you like to explain to your people how you've been planning genocide while maintaining the pretense of civilized behavior? The chamber fell silent as representatives realized that their most classified strategic documents were being displayed for everyone to see. The evidence was undeniable, the planning meticulous, and the intent unmistakable. Several species who had voted for human expulsion based on manipulated information were seeing the true agenda for the first time. High Coordinator Zeth Ka attempted to regain control of the situation. Even if these documents are genuine, you must understand that 12 species with combined fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands cannot be threatened by a single expelled species with limited resources and no allies. You're absolutely right, Marcus agreed. 12 species with hundreds of thousands of ships would indeed be an overwhelming force. Unfortunately for your plans, you're no longer facing a single expelled species with no allies. The holographic displays changed again, showing scenes from across the galaxy that made several representatives gasp in shock. Human warships emerging from hyperspace in formation, with vessels belonging to dozens of minor species that had been ignored or oppressed by Council authority. Massive fleets assembling in systems that had supposedly been empty space. Industrial facilities that dwarfed anything in Council territory churning out weapons of war. "Meet the Outer Rim Alliance," Marcus announced. 47 species who decided they were tired of Council arrogance and ready to support humanity's bid to restructure galactic civilization. "We've been building this coalition for the past 6 months while you were congratulating yourselves on solving the human problem." Ambassador Chen's voice echoed through the chamber as he appeared on another display, broadcasting from what appeared to be the command center of a massive space station. "The Council accused humanity of being too violent for civilized society. You were wrong. We weren't too violent. We were too restrained. You've now forced us to abandon that restraint." The displays showed tactical readouts that made even the warlike Kragnoth representatives step back in alarm. Human fleet positions surrounded every major Council world. Weapons platforms that had been thought to be mining stations revealed their true nature as planet-killing siege engines. Research facilities that had been dismissed as academic institutions activated defensive systems that outclassed anything in the Council's arsenal. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves appeared on screen from her laboratory, surrounded by technologies that several species recognized from their own forbidden research archives. The Council forced us to develop weapons that violate galactic treaties. Since we're no longer bound by those treaties, we've made significant improvements to the designs. Would you like a demonstration? Before anyone could respond, long-range sensors throughout the chamber began detecting massive energy signatures from the outer system. The displays showed a small asteroid being targeted by an experimental human weapon. The asteroid simply ceased to exist, not destroyed or vaporized, but erased from reality at the quantum level. "That was our smallest weapon," Dr. Reeves noted casually. "Our largest can destabilize a star. We have 17 of them deployed throughout Council space, targeted at systems containing approximately 60% of your combined population. Consider this a deterrent rather than a threat." The Villani representative, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke in their melodic voice. "You speak of restructuring galactic civilization. What exactly are you proposing? Complete conquest? The destruction of everything we have built?" Marcus's expression softened slightly, showing the diplomat he had trained to be. "We're proposing exactly what my father spent 15 years trying to achieve through peaceful means. A truly representative galactic government where all species have equal voice, regardless of their military power or economic influence. The difference is that now we're negotiating from a position of strength rather than supplication." Admiral Martinez leaned forward on her display. "The Council can choose to surrender and participate in establishing a new galactic order based on actual equality and mutual respect. Or you can choose to fight a war that will end with the complete destruction of your current power structure and the forcible implementation of our preferred system. Either way, the age of Council dominance is over." High Coordinator Zeth Ka processed the available data and reached the logical conclusion that their position was untenable. "You are demanding our unconditional surrender." "We're demanding justice," Marcus corrected. "For 6 months, you've implemented economic warfare designed to weaken human colonies and force desperate actions that would justify military intervention. You've manipulated information, violated your own laws, and planned genocide while maintaining the pretense of moral authority. We're simply returning the favor." The holographic displays shifted to show human ships moving into attack positions throughout Council space. Not the desperate, defensive formations that the Council's intelligence services had been tracking, but coordinated battle groups that had been hiding in plain sight while appearing to be evacuation and supply missions. Commander Torres appeared from his flagship, surrounded by displays showing industrial output that exceeded anything the Council had believed possible. "Every species in this chamber has raw material needs that we can supply more efficiently than your current sources. Every species has security concerns that we can address more effectively than your current military. Every species has research goals that we can support better than your current academic institutions. The question is whether you want to benefit from these capabilities as partners or experience them as conquered subjects." The threat was clear, but so was the opportunity. Several species had indeed chafed under Council restrictions that favored the founding members at the expense of newer additions. The promise of genuine equality, backed by demonstrated superior military and industrial capacity, was more appealing than continued subservience to the three-species coalition that had orchestrated humanity's expulsion. The Zephyrian representative was the first to break ranks, their crystalline form resonating with harmonics that conveyed resignation and pragmatic acceptance. "The humans have demonstrated capabilities that we did not anticipate, and organizational skills that we underestimated. Perhaps it is time to reconsider our assumptions about galactic leadership." One by one, species began withdrawing support from the Council's current structure. Some were motivated by fear of human retaliation, others by genuine belief that change was needed, and still others by simple recognition that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Speaker Vorthak was among the last to accept reality. You have won this confrontation through deception and preparation. But do you truly believe you can govern a galaxy through fear and superior firepower? What happens when your weapons are no longer the strongest? What happens when other species develop countermeasures to your technologies? Marcus smiled again, but this time there was genuine warmth in the expression rather than cold calculation. That's exactly what we're hoping for. Competition drives innovation. Conflict drives evolution. Peace through strength is temporary. Peace through mutual respect and beneficial relationships is permanent. The difference is that we're offering genuine partnership rather than the illusion of representation that the Council has been providing. Ambassador Chen stepped forward on his display. My son learned something that took me 15 years to understand. Diplomacy without the option of force is just elaborate begging, but force without the possibility of diplomacy is just tyranny. We're offering both. You can choose to work with us to build something better than what existed before, or you can choose to be conquered and have that better system imposed upon you. Either way, the galaxy is going to change. The transformation that followed was swift and comprehensive. The Galactic Council was dissolved within a week, replaced by the Galactic Federation with proportional representation based on population and contribution rather than historical precedent. Human technologies were shared freely with species that demonstrated good faith cooperation. Former Council leadership was given the choice between exile to restricted territories or cooperation with the new government under strict supervision. Some species chose to fight, believing that human advantages were temporary and could be overcome through traditional military campaigns. They learned the hard way that humans who had spent centuries being restrained by galactic law and custom fought very differently when those restraints were removed. The wars were brief, decisive, and served as effective demonstrations to any other species considering resistance. Within 2 years, galactic civilization was functioning more efficiently and equitably than it had in centuries. Trade flowed more freely, research advanced more rapidly, and conflicts between species were resolved through mediation rather than council dictates. The Outer Rim territories that had been dismissed as barbaric frontier zones became thriving centers of innovation and growth. Marcus Chen accepted the position of First Secretary of the new Federation, serving as the Chief Diplomatic Officer for an organization that truly represented the interests of all galactic citizens rather than just the powerful few. His father served as Ambassador Emeritus, finally able to practice the kind of diplomacy he had always envisioned in an environment where all parties negotiated as equals. Admiral Martinez maintained her position as Supreme Commander of Federation Defense Forces, overseeing a military that was designed to protect member species from external threats rather than to enforce internal compliance. The weapons that had forced the Council's surrender were gradually converted to defensive applications or dismantled entirely as they became unnecessary. Dr. Reeves established the Federation Research Institute, where scientists from all member species worked together on projects that had been forbidden under Council law. The breakthroughs achieved through genuine cooperation exceeded anything that had been possible under the old system of restricted and compartmentalized research. The galaxy had feared humanity's capacity for violence and cast them out to protect civilized society. In doing so, they had created exactly the threat they were trying to avoid. But they had also proven that sometimes violence, properly applied and carefully controlled, could be a tool for creating justice, rather than just destruction. Humanity had learned to be civilized during their time in galactic society, but they had never forgotten how to be human. And being human meant refusing to accept injustice, even when fighting it seemed impossible. The galaxy was a better place for that reminder, even if the lesson had required breaking a few things to deliver it.